dress hit the floor of the hotel suite before Lords could even turn around. She heard it, the soft collapse of silk against marble, and when she looked, her husband's mother was already pointing at the door, one manicured finger aimed like a verdict. "Pack the rest yourself," Vivienne Ashcroft said. "We need this room by 6. Lords Ashcroft, 37 years old, wife of 9 years, stood in the center of a suite she had helped design the interior of, though no one in that room knew that, and said nothing. She bent down, picked up the dress, folded it the way her grandmother had taught her, and placed it into the open suitcase on the bed. Her husband, Calloway Ashcroft, 41, stood near the window. He didn't look at her. He was watching the harbor below, the way sunlight moved across the water, as though what was happening behind him required no acknowledgement at all. His girlfriend, the word still felt wrong, like a shoe on the wrong foot, stood just inside the doorway. Trinette Bassett, 29, who had been introduced to Lords at a Christmas dinner 2 years ago as a colleague from acquisitions. She was wearing a blouse that cost more than Lords' first car. She looked at her nails while Lords packed. "Don't forget the bathroom," Vivienne said. "I don't want to find her things in the morning." Calloway finally spoke. "Mom, give us a minute." Vivienne looked at her son with the particular brand of patience wealthy women reserve for children who are being unnecessarily sentimental. Then she left. Trinette followed without being asked. The door clicked shut. Calloway turned from the window. For a moment he looked almost like the man she had married, the one who used to leave coffee on her side of the bed before she woke up, who learned the names of her colleagues' children so he could ask about them at dinners. Almost. "I didn't want it to happen this way," he said. Lord zipped the suitcase. "The papers are already filed," he continued. "My attorney says it should be clean. 60 days, and then, I know what 60 days means, Calloway." She lifted the bag off the bed. It was heavier than she expected, and she adjusted her grip without asking for help. He didn't offer any. "You'll be taken care of," he said. "The settlement is fair. You won't have to worry." She walked to the door. "Lords." His voice had something in it, not quite regret, but the shape of it. "You have to understand. Trinette and I." She opened the door and walked out. She did not cry in the elevator. She did not cry in the lobby, or in the town car she called herself, or during the 40-minute drive back to the city. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched the highway pass and thought about the very first time she had come to this coast, 22 years old, a junior consultant with a second-hand blazer and a carry-on bag that had a broken wheel she hadn't had money to fix. She had dragged it across the terminal floor, one-sided and grinding, and thought, "I am going to fix everything. Just give me time." She had been given time. She'd used it. The town car pulled up to a building whose name was not on the outside, because buildings of a certain caliber don't need to advertise. The doorman nodded without ceremony. Upstairs, her assistant, Petra had worked with her for 6 years, had already left a pot of tea on the kitchen counter and a stack of folders on the dining room table. Lord set down her suitcase, poured the tea, and sat down with the folders. She had a board meeting in 14 hours. The story of how Lords Vane became Lords Ashcroft is not complicated. She was 28, newly appointed to her first executive role, and she met Calloway at a fundraiser for a children's hospital. He was charming in the easy way of men who have always been liked. He laughed at things, she said. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered, 2 weeks later, that she had mentioned her mother was recovering from knee surgery, and he asked how she was doing. She married him. She told herself it made sense to keep her professional life separate. This was true. The industry she operated in was small and interconnected, and relationships changed dynamics, and she had spent a decade building something she did not want complicated by proximity to a spouse's ambitions. Calloway ran his family's real estate development company, Ashcroft Holdings, a respectable firm, solid reputation, mid-market work. There was no natural overlap. So she kept 2 things, her maiden name in every professional context, and a degree of separation that she now understood had protected them both, or she had thought it protected them. What it had actually done was make it possible for Calloway to spend 9 years not understanding the exact shape of the woman he had married. This was his mistake, not the affair, the underestimation. The company Lords ran was called Vane Capital Group. It was not a name that appeared on storefronts or in advertisements. What it appeared on was the ownership structure of 14 hotel properties across the eastern seaboard, and 3 in Europe, 2 logistics firms, a stake in a regional airline, and, most relevant to the current situation, the primary financing arrangement behind the expansion of Ashcroft Holdings' most ambitious project to date, the Meridian, a mixed-use development in the waterfront district that Calloway had been building his entire professional reputation around for the past 4 years. Calloway did not know that the lead financier who had made the Meridian possible was his wife. He had met the representatives from Vane Capital in conference rooms. He had shaken hands with the Deputy Director of Acquisitions, a man named Roland, whom he addressed with the comfortable confidence of someone who believes he understands the room. He had never asked to meet the principal. This was not unusual. It was, however, in this case, a choice that had consequences. Lourdes had not hidden herself. She simply had not announced herself. There is a difference, and it matters. She had told Calloway early in their marriage that she worked in capital investment. He had nodded and said, "That's great," and moved on to talking about a project he was excited about. She had tried twice more in the first 2 years to explain in more detail what her work actually involved. Both times he had listened with the expression of someone waiting for their turn to speak. After that, she had stopped explaining. She answered questions when asked. No questions came. When his mother called her the wife at family dinners, never Lourdes, never by name. She had not corrected this either. There had seemed to be no point. She was the wife. Fine. She knew what she was. The 60 days after Calloway filed were quiet, in the way that held breath is quiet. Lourdes continued working. She attended the board meeting the morning after the hotel suite. She signed off on a refinancing arrangement in week 3. She had lunch with her attorney, a woman named Genevieve Rourke, who had an office full of ficus trees and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen everything twice, and they talked about the settlement terms. "He's offering the Garrison Park condo and a monthly figure," Genevieve said. "I know. It's lower than what you'd be entitled to if we contested. I know that too." Genevieve set down her pen. "Lourdes, I'm not contesting. You've been married 9 years. You have—" "I don't want a long fight," Lourdes said. "I want it to be over." Genevieve looked at her for a moment. "All right. But I want you to understand, if circumstances change, if there's any reason to revisit, I'll call you." What she did not tell Genevieve, because it was not yet relevant, was that the Meridian's Phase 2 financing was coming up for review. Vane Capital's arrangement with Ashcroft Holdings included a standard performance review clause at the 18-month mark. The 18-month mark was in 6 weeks. She had not engineered this. The timing was simply what it was. She had been working on this deal long before Calloway's mother threw her dress on the floor of a hotel suite. But she also saw no reason to rush past it. She would review the file when the time came. She would make the decision that the numbers supported. The night the settlement was signed, Calloway took Trinette to the same restaurant where he and Lourdes had celebrated their 3rd anniversary. Lourdes knew this because Trinette posted a photograph of the dessert menu with a small red heart emoji. She saw it while she was eating leftover soup at her kitchen counter and reading a report about vacancy rates in coastal markets. She finished the report. She washed her bowl. She went to bed. She did not think about the photograph again. Or she tried not to. What she thought about instead was a conversation she'd had years ago with the woman who had mentored her in the industry, a woman named Constance Ibori, retired now, who had said to her once over terrible airport coffee, "The thing people don't understand about power is that you don't have to use it to have it. Most of the time, just having it is enough." Lourdes had not fully understood this at the time. She understood it now. The Meridian review came on a Tuesday. Roland, her deputy director, presented the file with the careful neutrality he brought to all difficult conversations. The numbers were fine. Ashcroft Holdings had hit its milestones. The construction timeline was on track, and the early commercial leasing was performing at projection. On paper, there was no reason to do anything other than proceed with Phase 2. "The recommendation from the analysis team is to continue," Roland said. "I know," Lourdes said. "Do you want to? Give me the file." She took it home. She sat with it for 2 evenings, reading not just the projections but the structure, who was on the Ashcroft Holdings board, what commitments had been made to subcontractors, what the ripple effects would be if Phase 2 financing were restructured or delayed. She was not looking for a reason to pull the deal. She was looking at it with the same eyes she brought to everything. Clearly, without sentiment, and with full awareness of what the decision would mean. The thing was, the file had a problem, not a manufactured one, a real one. In reviewing the Phase 2 projections, her team had identified an irregular pattern in the cost reporting that hadn't been visible in the Phase 1 documents. It wasn't conclusive. It required further due diligence. But it was real. And it was exactly the kind of thing that a firm with Vane Capital's fiduciary responsibilities could not overlook. She called Roland on Thursday morning. "Flag it for the board," she said. "We need a full audit of the Phase 2 cost structure before we release the tranche. Freeze the disbursement pending review. That'll delay Phase 2 by at least 2 months, Roland said. "Possibly 3. I know. Ashcroft Holdings is going to push back. They're welcome to." There was a pause on the line. Roland had been with her long enough to know when to stop questioning. "I'll draft the notice." The notice went out that afternoon. Calloway called at 7:47 in the evening. She watched his name appear on her phone screen, the same contact photo she'd never updated, him at a beach squinting into the sun, and let it ring 4 times before answering. "What is this?" he said. No greeting. "Hello, Calloway. I just got off the phone with my attorney. He says our financing is frozen. He says it's coming from Vane Capital. He says," there was a pause. A long one. "He's saying the principal of Vane Capital is, Lords, is that you?" "It is," she said. The silence that followed was the kind that fills up rooms. "You've been," he started again. "For 4 years you've been the lead financier on the Meridian." "Yes. You never told me. You never asked what my company did, Calloway. You asked once, early on, and then you didn't ask again." That's not the same thing as. What would you like it to be the same thing as?" He didn't answer. She could hear him breathing, or she thought she could. "The freeze is because of an irregularity in the cost reporting," she said. "It's not personal. My team found something that requires audit before we can release Phase 2 funds. This is standard due diligence. If the numbers clear, disbursement proceeds. If they don't, we'll discuss restructuring options. This is because of the divorce. The irregularity existed before the divorce." "Lords, I have a call in 20 minutes, she said. "My team will be in touch with yours about the audit timeline." She ended the call. She sat for a moment in the quiet of her apartment. The one she had chosen herself, decorated herself, lived in for the past 3 months with the particular silence of someone reclaiming their own square footage. The city was doing what it always did outside her windows, moving, lit up, indifferent to any individual story being told within it. She picked up her phone again and texted Petra. "Confirm 8 p.m. call is still on. I'll be ready." The audit took 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, several things happened in the orbit of Ashcroft Holdings that Lords did not orchestrate and would not have claimed responsibility for even if she had. Calloway's mother, Vivian, called her once. Lords answered on the second ring. "I want to know what you think you're doing," Vivian said. "Hello, Vivian. You know what this freeze is doing to us. To the company. To Calloway's reputation. I know what irregular cost reporting does to an investor's fiduciary obligations. Yes. This is spite," Vivian said. "This is what this is. You were always," she seemed to search for the word, "you were always very quiet. I should have known. Quiet people are always planning something." Lords thought about this. "I was quiet," she said, "because no one asked me anything." Vivienne hung up. The audit concluded on a Wednesday. The irregularity turned out to be less severe than the initial flag had suggested. Sloppy accounting, not fraud, which was both better and worse in different ways. Better because the numbers were ultimately reconcilable. Worse because it exposed gaps in Ashcroft Holdings' internal controls that any serious institutional investor would need addressed before releasing further capital. Roland sent Calloway's team a 14-point list of required remediation steps. He ceded Lords. The list was accurate and thorough, and she knew, deeply humbling to receive. The Meridian board met the following week. Lords was not present. She didn't need to be. Roland represented Vane Capital's position with the even-toned precision she had spent 6 years building in him. What she heard afterward, through the standard communications that followed such meetings, was that several members of the Ashcroft Holdings board had asked questions that Calloway had not been able to answer cleanly. Questions about oversight, about due diligence, about why the principal financing partner had to flag what internal reviews should have caught. These were fair questions. They were the right questions. The meeting ran 3 hours. She was in the middle of a different deal, a coastal resort acquisition in South Carolina that she was genuinely excited about. When Petra buzzed her. "Calloway Ashcroft is in the lobby." Lord set down her pen. "Did he have an appointment?" "No. Tell him I'm available in 20 minutes. She spent those 20 minutes finishing her notes on the resort file. Then she washed her hands, poured a glass of water, and had him brought to the small conference room, not her office. He looked like he hadn't slept well. His jacket was right, his shirt was right, but something around his eyes was different. Some particular quality of certainty had gone out of them. He sat down across from her. She sat. "I owe you an apology," he said. She had not expected that. She kept her expression neutral, not just for how the marriage ended. He pressed his hands flat on the table as though steadying himself. "For not knowing, for 9 years of not knowing who you were, who you actually were. I don't know what that is except embarrassing and wrong." She didn't say anything. "I don't think you froze the deal to hurt me," he said. "I said that. I was angry, and it was easier than the other thing." "What other thing?" "Knowing that you'd found something real. Knowing that my house wasn't in order and someone else had to be the one to catch it." He exhaled. "My board asked me some questions last week that I couldn't answer. I've been building this company for 15 years and I couldn't answer basic questions about our internal controls." Lords lifted her glass, took a sip of water, set it back down. The audit found accounting errors, she said. Not fraud. That's recoverable. I know if your team implements the remediation steps, phase 2 can proceed. I know that too. He looked at her. Is that something you're still willing to do, after everything? She thought about this question seriously, which was the only way she knew how to think about things. The Meridian is a good project, she said. The asset fundamentals are sound. If the remediation is completed with integrity, Bain Capital's investment position doesn't change, you'd still finance it. The numbers would still support financing it. He nodded slowly. The distinction was not lost on him. She wasn't doing it for him. She was doing it because it was the right financial decision. The fact that it would also help him was incidental. He seemed to understand this, and to his credit, he didn't try to collapse the two things together. I'm sorry, he said again, for what my mother did. With the dress. He paused. For letting her. Lourdes looked at him for a moment. The dress had been silk crepe, a deep sage green. She had bought it on a work trip to Milan, the year they got engaged. She had liked it very much. I have someone coming at 11, she said. Is there anything else? He shook his head. He stood. He reached out to shake her hand, and she shook it. Firm, brief, professional, and then he left. She went back to her office, sat down, and picked up her pen. The South Carolina resort had excellent bones. The location was strong. With the right renovation plan and a thoughtful rebranding, the return on a 5-year hold would be significant. She had a call with the seller's agent at 2, and before that she wanted to have her questions ready. She turned to a fresh page in her notepad and started writing. The divorce was finalized on a Friday in early November. Genevieve called to confirm, and Lord thanked her and made a note to send flowers to her office. Genevieve was good at what she did and had been patient with a client who kept saying she was fine. That evening, Lourdes walked from her office to a restaurant 6 blocks south, where she had a standing reservation. A table near the window, not too close, just enough to see the street without being in it. She ordered what she always ordered. She ate slowly. She watched people moving through the city in their coats and their particular urgencies, and she thought about nothing specific. Afterward, she walked home. It was cold, clean-aired, the kind of November night that makes a city feel like it's been rinsed. She had her hands in her pockets, and her face turned slightly into the wind, and she thought, this is what I have. This city, this coat, this life I have been building since I was 22 years old, dragging a broken suitcase across a terminal floor. This is what remains when you remove everything that was borrowed, or temporary, or someone else's idea of what I should be. It was enough, more than enough actually. She took the stairs up to her floor because she had started doing that in September, and it had become a habit she liked. She unlocked her apartment, turned on the light in the kitchen, and put the kettle on. On the table was a folder Petra had left. The preliminary numbers on a waterfront property in Savannah that her acquisitions team had flagged as worth a look. She poured her tea, sat down, and opened it. The numbers were interesting. She reached for a pen.